All right, now this one's interesting. Could Mahito theoretically resurrect the dead? Let's talk about it. All right, first of all, shout out to Not Sentinel for asking me about this today. And he just wanted to know, could a full potential, fully realized Mahito do something like this? And if so, what factors might matter in terms of how long it's been since they passed away or the condition of the body, etc. Right? And this is really interesting, and it's a potential that I never even thought about before because, as some of you may be aware, I put out a video on full potential Mahito where we looked at what might have happened if he hadn't been killed off in the story and he got a chance to develop, because idle transfiguration is the most busted technique in the verse, right? So Mahito could have been something far beyond Sukuna, even in my opinion. Like, he could have made his body like Sukuna's perfect body for sorcery. If he would have understood physiology and biology to a deeper level, then perhaps he could have even given himself like the six eyes or other curse techniques. Like, it's just really crazy what that technique is capable of. So, could it bring someone back to life? Maybe. We know that in JJK, the body follows the shape of the soul, and that's how Mahito's technique works. He adjusts your soul, and your body will shift based on that. It's how he augments his own form, and of course, how he transforms other people as well. And considering he can make it so you have 15 arms, wings, claws, who's to say that he couldn't literally regulate your entire nervous system, your biology, and make it so that your heart starts beating again? And where this gets really interesting is that it might just entirely depend on how Mahito perceives these things. And what I mean by that is the soul, body, and mind connection in JJK is very nebulous. And they get really philosophical about it, mostly in this panel right here, where Kinjaku and Mahito are discussing their respective worldviews, where Mahito speaks about how the soul comes before the body, because when he morphs the soul, the body follows it. But Kinjaku says, yeah, that makes sense because of idle transfiguration and because of how you interact with the world. But I interact with the world differently because my technique deals with the body itself. And I have memories from these bodies I inhabit, even though there's no logical way to make sense of why that is. So, my perspective, and again, the way I interact with the world is vastly different from yours. But who's to say that they can't both be true and both be right based on our own experience, right? So, very much like, to put it in a nutshell, your perception of the world dictates how you interact with it. So, because there is this very nebulous connection between the mind, body, and soul, and if we want to interject death into that equation, what does that mean, right? Does the soul escape the body entirely when it passes away, meaning there would no longer be anything for Mahito to interact with? Or is it still there, maybe just an empty vessel after the person has actually passed on? We don't really know. One of the most interesting moments in relation to this is when Geto subconsciously chokes Kinjaku, something that this body does long after Geto has passed away, right? And Gojo is like, Suguru, you just gonna let yourself get used like that? And Kinjaku laughs and says, this is the first time anything like this has ever happened. So what was this, right? And Gege was asked about this one time in an interview, and he responded that this is basically like a dragonfly after its head has been cut off. It's more instinct rather than like actual agency from Geto in this moment. And that makes sense to me, especially since he's long since passed away in this moment. But still, there was something here. So was that just innately in his body to react like that? Could this be his soul, like the fragments or essence of his soul that still may linger in this body? We don't know. Let's just take a look at some transfigured humans, right? I mean, they would technically probably still be alive in this format, though not really in a way that most people would recognize. But could Mahito theoretically bring this person back to their original form if he wanted to? Maybe. And how far a stretch is it to say that somebody who just, died of natural causes or whatever the case it might be, Mahito couldn't quickly transfigure their soul to make them perfectly healthy and have their heart beating again and alive, right? Would their soul have escaped yet at that point? And then we might get into the question of how much time could pass before he would no longer be able to do this. And that's another question, right? But at least on some level, even if we just want to think of it as like a normal doctor resuscitating somebody to life, Mahito should be able to do that. But in terms of Mahito walking to the nearest cemetery and giving everyone a new lease on life, it's hard to say, right? I think it really just depends on how these concepts interact in JJK. If the souls of those people are still there within their corpses, then perhaps he could do something with it. Again, this might be based on his own understanding of these things, and as we saw him in the series, I don't think he possessed a deep enough knowledge to do something like that. But again, theoretically, a full potential Mahito that only continued to learn about all of this, maybe he could. And to return to the philosophical side of things, it might all hinge on just how Mahito perceives those things to connect and work. If he believes that the soul is still there and that he can still interact with it, maybe he'll be able to, right? But then that brings on a whole other host of questions. If he does theoretically resurrect someone in this way, is it really them? Or is it just his perception of them? Kind of like a ship of Theseus almost situation, if you guys are familiar with that thought experiment. But yeah, this was a really cool idea. So let me know what you guys think.